when my backyard wasn't mine anymore. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside with your cup of coffee, and realizing that your backyard, the place you thought was private, peaceful, and yours, suddenly feels like it belongs to everyone else. That's exactly what happened to me when my homeowners association, or HOA, decided to come up with one of their strangest and most unbelievable ideas yet. Now, most of us see our backyard as a personal space. It's where families barbecue, kids play, and people relax after a long day. For me, it was my little sanctuary. I had a small garden, a swing for my kids, and a patio where I enjoyed reading on quiet afternoons. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. At least that's what I thought. Everything changed when the HOA came up with what they proudly called a community improvement project. Instead of fixing broken sidewalks, repainting fences, or doing something useful, their big idea was to transform my backyard into a shared park for everyone in the neighborhood. Yes, you heard that right. My private property, which I bought with my hard-earned money, was suddenly seen as a public space. At first, I thought they were joking. I mean, who would ever believe that an HOA could just decide your yard is no longer yours? But soon enough, I realized they were completely serious. They had plans, rules, and even scheduled events that involved my backyard. The HOA argued that it would benefit the community if my property became an open area where people could gather. They painted a picture of neighbors enjoying picnics, kids running around, and families having birthday parties. All in my backyard. Sounds nice, right? Well, not when you're the homeowner who loses every ounce of privacy and control over your own land. Started small. First, they told me I couldn't make any major changes to my backyard without their approval. Then, they claimed that since my yard was accessible from the street, it was a perfect location for the so-called park. Before I knew it, neighbors were already talking about setting up chairs, picnic tables, and even a grill on my property. I cannot explain how strange and frustrating it felt. The place where I once relaxed suddenly became crowded with strangers. My peaceful mornings were replaced with noisy afternoons. Instead of my kids swinging in our backyard, other people's children were running around as if they owned the place. It was like my home had turned into a public playground overnight, and no one cared how I felt about it. That was the moment when I truly realized how far HOAs can go with their bizarre inventions. This wasn't just about rules anymore, it was about control. It was about taking away the very meaning of private property and making homeowners feel powerless. So when I say my backyard wasn't mine anymore, I mean it literally. The HOA tried to erase the line between personal and public, and it left me asking one simple question. If my own home isn't safe from their strange ideas, then what is? Meet the HOA, neighborhood rulers with strange ideas. If you have ever lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, or HOA, then you already know how much power they think they have. For those who don't know, an HOA is basically a group of people, usually neighbors, who claim to manage the community, make rules, and protect property values. On paper, that sounds good. Who doesn't want a clean, well-kept neighborhood? But in reality, many HOAs act less like community helpers and more like self-appointed rulers. My HOA was no different. From the very beginning, I noticed that the people running it loved control. They loved telling people what to do, even about the smallest and silliest things. The color of your house, the type of flowers in your garden, where you parked your car, or even the height of your grass. Nothing was too small for them to stick their noses into. And if you didn't follow their endless rules, you could expect warning letters, fines, or even threats of legal action. Now, the members of my HOA weren't professionals or experts in property management. They were just regular neighbors, retired people with too much time, busybodies who enjoyed gossip, or folks who simply liked feeling powerful. Together, they formed a board and treated themselves like kings and queens of the neighborhood. Every decision they made felt less about improving the community and more about proving their authority. One of their favorite phrases was, "It's for the good of the neighborhood." They used this line to justify every ridiculous demand. Didn't mow your lawn fast enough? It's for the good of the neighborhood. Parked your car in the driveway instead of the garage? It's for the good of the neighborhood. Hung holiday lights that were too colorful? You guessed it. It's for the good of the neighborhood. The truth is, most of their so-called improvements were just bizarre ideas that nobody really asked for. For example, at one point they wanted everyone to replace their perfectly fine mailboxes with identical, expensive designer mailboxes. Another time, they insisted on banning basketball hoops in driveways, saying they looked messy. And let's not forget their obsession with lawns. If even one patch of grass turned brown, they acted like it was the end of the world. But the strangest idea of all was their obsession with space. Specifically, my backyard. Somehow, in their twisted logic, they believed that turning private property into a shared community park would be a brilliant idea. They talked about it in their meetings like it was some kind of revolutionary plan that would bring people together. To them, it wasn't crazy. To them, it was innovative and visionary. This is what makes HOAs so difficult to deal with. They wrap their wildest, most unreasonable ideas in fancy words like community spirit and improving property values. But in reality, it's just a way for them to control more and more of your life. They stop seeing you as a homeowner with rights and start seeing you as just another piece of property under their rule. So when I introduce my HOA, I don't see friendly neighbors working for the community. I see self-proclaimed rulers with strange ideas, sitting in their little board meetings, making decisions that affect everyone but benefit no one. And as you'll see, their bizarre attempt to control my backyard was their most outrageous invention yet. It all began with a simple swing set. Sometimes the biggest problems start from the smallest things. In my case, everything began with something as simple and innocent as a swing set in my backyard. I bought it for my kids. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy wooden frame with 2 swings, a slide, and a little climbing ladder. For me, it was about giving my children a safe place to play without having to leave home. For them, it was pure joy, hours of fun, laughter, and memories. But for the HOA, it was the beginning of their most bizarre idea yet. At first, the swing set was no issue. My kids played, my neighbors' kids sometimes came over, and life felt normal. But soon, the HOA got wind of it. They sent me a letter claiming that my swing set violated community aesthetics. According to them, the structure was too big, too visible, and didn't match the look of the neighborhood. Imagine that, a swing set not matching the neighborhood. I thought it was ridiculous, but I ignored it. After all, it was on my property. I wasn't blocking anyone's view, I wasn't making noise late at night, and no one had ever complained to me directly. But ignoring the HOA was a mistake, because they don't take no for an answer. A week later, I got another letter, this time saying that if I wanted to keep the swing set, I'd need special approval from the HOA board. They even invited me to one of their meetings to discuss the matter. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a swing set. This was about control. At the meeting, the board members smiled politely but made it very clear they didn't like the swing set. They said it attracted unnecessary attention and made my yard look like a public playground. Then one member suggested, half-jokingly, "Well, if it looks like a park, maybe we should treat it like one." Everyone laughed, but I noticed that their laughter carried weight. What started as a joke quickly turned into a serious conversation. From that moment on, the HOA began pushing the idea that my backyard could serve the greater good of the neighborhood. They argued that since my swing set already looked like something kids would enjoy, why not make it official? Why not allow all the neighborhood children to play there? Why not let families gather there? I sat there in disbelief. I couldn't understand how something I bought for my own children could suddenly become the property of everyone else. But that's exactly how the HOA operated. They twisted something small and personal into a community issue. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more kids showing up in my yard. Some parents even encouraged it, saying things like, "Oh, the HOA said this was fine." My quiet, private space was slowly turning into the neighborhood hangout spot, and it all began because I wanted to give my kids a swing set. That was the turning point. What should have been a simple family addition turned into the seed for the HOA's bizarre plan. Little did I know, the swing set was just the beginning of them trying to claim my entire backyard as their latest invention, a so-called public park. The HOA's genius plan. A public park in my backyard. If you thought the swing set situation was bad, wait until you hear about the HOA's so-called genius plan. After weeks of letters, meetings, and whispered conversations, the board finally revealed what they had been cooking up behind closed doors. They wanted to officially turn my backyard into a public park for the neighborhood. Yes, you heard that right. My private yard, the one I paid for, the one listed under my name, was suddenly being considered as a community project. The way they presented it was almost laughable. At a community meeting, the HOA chair stood up with a wide smile and proudly announced, "We have a new initiative to bring neighbors together and strengthen community bonds." Then she pulled out a chart, an actual chart, showing how underused spaces in the neighborhood could be turned into shared recreational areas. And guess what was at the top of their list? My backyard. They called it Backyard Park Project. To them, it was brilliant. They argued that since my yard was already somewhat open, and since children were already playing on the swing set, it would be the perfect spot for everyone to enjoy. They talked about setting up benches, picnic tables, maybe even a little walking path. They wanted to make it official. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were treating my personal property like it was a public square. And the worst part? The other neighbors seemed excited about it. Some clapped. Others said things like, "That's a wonderful idea." Or, "Finally, a safe place for the kids to play." Meanwhile, I sat in silence, stunned that nobody seemed to care about the fact that I owned the land. The HOA brushed that detail aside. Their argument was simple. It's for the good of the community. They claimed it would raise property values, encourage community spirit, and make our neighborhood more family-friendly. But let's be honest. What they really wanted was free land they didn't have to buy or maintain. They wanted to shift the responsibility and cost onto me while taking away my right to use my own space as I pleased. To make things worse, they even drafted a list of rules for this so-called park. No private picnics. No modifications without HOA approval. No fencing to block community access. They were literally writing laws about what I could and couldn't do in my own yard. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a bad idea. It was a full-scale takeover. The HOA's genius plan wasn't about community. It was about control. They didn't care about my rights, my family, or my privacy. They only cared about making themselves look powerful and visionary. Looking back, I still laugh at the irony of it all. They called it a community improvement project, but for me, it was the complete opposite. It didn't improve my life. It ruined the peace I had in my own home. And it all started with the HOA's bizarre obsession with turning my backyard into their next big invention. A public park that nobody asked for except them. Absurd rules. No private picnics allowed on my property. When the HOA announced their big plan to turn my backyard into a public park, I thought the situation couldn't possibly get any stranger. I was wrong, because not only did they want to take over my yard, they also wanted to control how it was used. That's when they introduced what I can only describe as the most absurd set of rules I had ever seen in my life. The first rule that caught my attention was written right at the top of their so-called backyard park guidelines. It said, "No private picnics allowed." Let that sink in. On my own property, where I pay the mortgage and taxes, I was being told that my family couldn't sit down for a picnic without HOA approval. The irony was unbelievable. Apparently, neighbors could gather there, bring food, and host little parties, but I, the actual homeowner, was restricted. It was like I had fewer rights than random visitors. And it didn't stop there. The rules kept getting more ridiculous the more I read. For example, they wanted to limit how many chairs I could set out in my yard. They claimed that too many chairs made the area look cluttered. They also banned me from putting up a grill, even though grilling had been one of my favorite things to do on weekends. Their excuse? A grill in a community space could be a fire hazard. Community space? Excuse me. This was my backyard. Another absurd rule said that I wasn't allowed to block access to the park. That meant I couldn't build a fence, couldn't plant tall bushes, and couldn't even lock the gate leading to my yard. In other words, the HOA wanted me to keep my property wide open for anyone to walk in whenever they felt like it. Imagine the level of discomfort that brings. My sense of privacy and safety vanished overnight. But perhaps the most insulting rule of all was this. If the HOA wanted to host an event, I had to leave my own backyard. Yes, you read that correctly. Their guidelines stated that the space had to remain clear of homeowners during official community events so that the HOA could manage things without interference. Basically, I would have to vacate my own property while strangers used it for their fun. Reading those rules felt like stepping into a bad comedy sketch. It was so outrageous that part of me wanted to laugh, but the other part was furious. This wasn't just about rules anymore, it was about power. The HOA wasn't trying to improve the neighborhood. They were trying to erase the very idea of private property. The absurdity of it all left me asking one question over and over again. How did it come to this? How did a simple swing set for my kids spiral into a list of rules telling me what I could and couldn't do in my own backyard? For me, those rules were the final straw. It was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a complete invasion of my life. And I knew that if I didn't fight back, the HOA would keep pushing until I had no control left at all. Neighbors using my lawn for parties and gatherings. Once the HOA pushed through their bizarre idea of turning my backyard into a so-called community park, the real chaos began. It started slowly, almost harmlessly, with a couple of kids from next door coming over to use the swing set. At first, I didn't mind too much. I thought maybe it was just for a few minutes of fun. But soon, those quick visits turned into full-blown gatherings, and before I knew it, my backyard had become the neighborhood's favorite hangout spot. The first real shock came on a Saturday afternoon. I walked outside to relax on my patio, only to find two families I barely knew setting up folding chairs and a cooler in my yard. They waved at me cheerfully, as if they were the ones doing me a favor, and said, "The HOA told us this was okay." I stood there stunned, watching strangers unload snacks and drinks onto my grass, like it was a public picnic ground. Then came the birthday parties. Oh yes, my backyard somehow became the neighborhood's party venue. One weekend, I came home to find balloons tied to my fence, music blasting, and kids running wild across my lawn. There was even a piñata swinging dangerously close to my garden. And here's the kicker. I wasn't even invited. Imagine coming home and discovering a full party happening in your yard, complete with decorations and cake, while you're treated like an outsider in your own space. It didn't stop at birthdays. There were barbecues, family reunions, and even a baby shower. I'd see cars parked along the street, and I already knew where the guests were heading, straight into my backyard. Some neighbors even acted like it was their right to be there. If I questioned them, they would say things like, "But this is a community area now," or, "The HOA said it belongs to everyone." The worst part was the mess. After every gathering, I was the one stuck cleaning up. Empty soda cans, paper plates, candy wrappers, and even broken toys were left scattered all over the place. My garden was trampled, my grass was ruined, and my once quiet patio was now sticky from spilled drinks. It was exhausting, and every time I complained, the HOA brushed me off, saying I should be proud that my yard was bringing joy to the community. Proud? I was furious. But it wasn't just the trash or the noise, it was the feeling of being invaded. My safe space, my private little escape, was gone. I could no longer sit outside in peace without the fear of strangers walking in at any moment. I couldn't enjoy my mornings without the sound of kids screaming on the swing set. I couldn't plan a family dinner outside without worrying someone would show up and interrupt it. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just inconvenience, it was theft. The HOA had stolen my privacy, my peace, and my control over my own property. And the neighbors, whether they realized it or not, were helping them do it. What started as a backyard for my family had been transformed into a free event space for everyone else. And with each party and gathering, my frustration only grew stronger. I knew this couldn't continue forever. Something had to change. The HOA calls me selfish for complaining. After weeks of dealing with noisy parties, strangers in my yard, and endless messes left behind, I finally reached my breaking point. I decided it was time to confront the HOA. I prepared myself with photos of the trash, notes about the noise, and even a few neighbor complaints I had quietly gathered. I thought if I showed them the reality of what was happening, they would understand my frustration. I was wrong. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up and explained everything. I told them how my backyard had turned into a public park against my will. I described how families I barely knew were using it for birthday parties, how I was stuck cleaning up the garbage, and how I couldn't enjoy a single peaceful moment in my own home anymore. I thought my words would get some sympathy or at least a little respect. Instead, the room went silent for a moment, and then one of the board members smirked. He leaned forward and said, "You sound awfully selfish." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. Selfish? For wanting to use my own backyard? For wanting peace in the space I pay for every month? Another member chimed in and said, "This park is bringing the community closer together. Everyone is enjoying it. Why can't you think of the bigger picture?" Bigger picture? All I could think about was how my life had been turned upside down by their ridiculous plan. Yet, somehow, they managed to twist it into a moral issue, as if I was the bad guy for daring to complain. They went on, painting me as someone who didn't care about my neighbors, someone who wanted to hoard my yard while others were trying to build community spirit. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The same people who had stolen my privacy and ignored my rights were now shaming me for speaking up. What made it worse was that some of the neighbors agreed. I heard whispers in the back of the room. Comments like, "Yeah, he's being greedy," and "It's just a yard, what's the big deal?" That was the moment I realized just how much the HOA had poisoned the situation. They had convinced people that taking over someone else's property was somehow noble, and that resisting it was selfish. But here's the truth. Wanting control of your own home is not selfish. Expecting privacy in your own backyard is not selfish. Wanting to sit on your patio without strangers crowding around is not selfish. What is selfish is an HOA stealing from one homeowner to make themselves look good to everyone else. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a mix of anger and determination. If the HOA wanted to label me selfish, fine, I could live with that. But what I couldn't live with was letting them continue to take advantage of me. That insult, the word selfish, was actually the spark that pushed me to fight back harder than ever before. Reaching the breaking point, my decision to fight back. Being called selfish by the HOA was the final straw. For weeks, I had tried to stay patient. I told myself maybe this would pass, maybe the HOA would come to its senses, or maybe the neighbors would realize how unfair it was. But the longer I waited, the worse things became. Every day, my yard looked less like my private property and more like a community park I never agreed to build. Every night, I went to bed feeling angry and powerless. The turning point came one Saturday morning. I walked outside to water my plants, only to find 3 picnic tables set up in the middle of my lawn. There were coolers, folding chairs, and a group of people chatting loudly as if they had rented a pavilion at some public park. Except they hadn't rented anything. It was my yard, and they didn't even ask permission. My kids looked at me confused and upset, asking why strangers were always in their play space. That was the moment I knew I couldn't let this continue. Enough was enough. I decided to fight back, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. HOAs thrive on intimidation and rules, and they count on homeowners being too scared or tired to push back. But I wasn't scared anymore, I was angry, and anger can be a powerful motivator. The first step I took was to document everything. I started taking pictures of every gathering, every mess left behind, and every unwanted guest in my yard. I kept a journal of dates and times, recording when people came in and how long they stayed. I even noted the noise levels because the HOA loved to fine people for noise, yet somehow ignored the chaos in my yard. The second step was research. I dug into my property deed, county laws, and HOA bylaws. And what I found was shocking. The HOA had no legal right to take over my backyard. None at all. They were bluffing, using intimidation to convince me and others that they had authority where they didn't. That discovery gave me hope. Next, I talked to a lawyer. At first, I was nervous. Lawyers are expensive. But I realized the cost of losing my backyard forever would be much greater. The lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. My rights as a homeowner were being violated. In fact, The HOA's actions could even be considered trespassing and harassment. Hearing that from a professional gave me the confidence I needed to move forward. With evidence in hand and legal support behind me, I started pushing back. I wrote formal complaints, demanded written responses from the HOA, and refused to let them bully me in meetings. When they called me selfish, I didn't back down. I reminded them that selfishness was forcing one person to sacrifice their home for everyone else's convenience. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about principle. If I let them take my yard, what would stop them from taking someone else's driveway, garage, or even a living room, for the good of the neighborhood? Reaching my breaking point wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Sometimes you don't realize how strong you are until you're pushed too far. And the HOA had pushed me farther than I ever thought possible. Now it was my turn to fight back. The outcome, how the HOA's plan fell apart. When I finally decided to stand my ground, I didn't expect things to change overnight. HOAs are stubborn, and mine was no exception. At first, they laughed at my complaints and dismissed my letters. They thought I was bluffing, just another angry homeowner who would eventually give up. But this time they were wrong. I had collected too much evidence for them to ignore. Every photo, every note, and every video showed the truth. The HOA was using my private property as a public park without my permission. I brought all of this to my lawyer, who drafted a formal legal notice to the HOA. That letter made it clear, if they didn't stop their nonsense, I would take them to court for trespassing, harassment, and violation of property rights. When the HOA board members received the letter, the tone suddenly shifted. These people who once acted like rulers of the neighborhood now looked nervous. They knew the law was not on their side. At the next HOA meeting, instead of barking orders at me, they were quiet and defensive. For the first time, they were the ones scrambling to explain themselves. But I wasn't the only one pushing back. As the truth spread, other neighbors started realizing how ridiculous the HOA's plan had been. Some admitted they had no idea my backyard was being taken over without my consent. They thought it had been an agreement. When they learned the HOA forced it on me, many of them turned against the board. The so-called community park suddenly didn't feel so fun when it was built on lies. The real breaking point came when the local county office got involved. My lawyer helped me file a complaint, and after reviewing the situation, county officials confirmed what I had been saying all along. The HOA had zero authority to convert private property into a shared space. In fact, they were warned that continuing this behavior could result in fines, or even a lawsuit against the entire HOA organization. That was the final nail in the coffin. The board had no choice but to back down. Within weeks, the picnic tables were removed, the swings were gone, and the neighbors were told the community park experiment was officially over. My yard was mine again, free of strangers and noise. But the damage to the HOA's reputation didn't disappear so easily. Many homeowners started questioning everything else the board had done. If they could lie about my property, what else had they been lying about? Slowly, trust in the HOA crumbled. A few board members even resigned, unable to handle the backlash. For me, the outcome was more than just winning my yard back. It was about proving a point. No matter how powerful an HOA acts, they are not above the law. They cannot bully people forever. And sometimes, all it takes is one person saying enough to bring their entire scheme crashing down. The HOA's bizarre invention, a backyard park, ended exactly where it belonged, in failure. And while the battle was stressful, it left me stronger, prouder, and finally at peace in my own home. Conclusion: why private property should stay private. At the end of this strange and exhausting journey, one lesson became clearer than ever. Private property should always stay private. My backyard was not just a piece of land with grass and trees. It was my personal space, the one place where I should feel safe, comfortable, and in control. But when the HOA decided to turn it into a public park, that sense of peace was stolen from me. Private property exists for a reason. When you buy a home or a piece of land, you are not just buying bricks, walls, or soil. You are buying the right to use that space in your own way, as long as it does not harm others. It is supposed to be your safe haven, where no one can interfere unless you invite them in. The moment someone else, even a homeowners association, tries to take that away, the entire meaning of ownership collapses. Think about it. What would life be like if we allowed groups or organizations to claim private spaces whenever they wanted? Today it's a backyard, tomorrow it could be your driveway, and next week maybe even your living room. Property rights are not just about fences or legal papers, they are about personal freedom. Without them, people lose control over their own lives. The HOA thought they were being clever, calling my backyard a community park. But what they were really doing was ignoring one of the most basic rules of society: respect for boundaries. A healthy neighborhood should run on respect, not control. Neighbors should help each other, not invade each other's privacy. When that line is crossed, harmony turns into chaos. This experience also taught me that standing up for your property is not just about protecting yourself. It sets an example for others. If I had stayed silent, the HOA would have continued with their bizarre ideas, and who knows whose home would have been next. By fighting back, I showed others that it's okay to say no when something is unfair. I reminded them that property rights are not optional, they are essential. In the end, the community park plan collapsed, and my yard returned to what it was meant to be, mine. But the bigger victory was in proving that private property matters. It is the foundation of independence, security, and peace of mind. Without it, we are at the mercy of whoever claims authority. With it, we can live with dignity and freedom. So, if there's one takeaway from this story, it is this: always guard your private property, no matter how small or simple it may seem. A backyard is not just grass. A home is not just walls. They represent your effort, your investment, and your right to live on your own terms. And as I sit in my backyard now, free from unwanted swings and picnic tables, I feel grateful. Grateful that I fought back. Grateful that my home is truly my own again. And most of all, grateful for the reminder that private property should always, without question, stay private.